Hi folks, welcome to Module 12 of Christian Worldview. In this module, we're going to focus on the big plan of redemption. This is the big story of the Bible, God's plan of redemption, salvation history. In order to understand the big picture of the biblical story, it's important to understand the pervasive picture of the effects of sin. The idea here is that because of a breach in our relationship with God, there was a breach in our relationship with other people, and therefore a breach in our relationship with our environment. Now, redemption, therefore, means first of all a reconciliation with God, which allows for an improvement in our relationship with other people, and then a re-establishment of our relationship with our environment, progressively, of course. But the ultimate goal of redemption is that all of this will be perfectly resolved. And so redemption looks like the re-establishment of all of these key relationships in their harmony, beginning with our relationship with God, and then the creation of a perfect community of perfect family of human beings, living in perfect harmony with their environment. That is the goal of God's plan of redemption, and it involves all of those elements. So it's not just a matter of us being personally reconciled with God. Certainly begins there, but it extends to the creation of human family, and of course the church is really the the sign of that reality. It's like an eschatological reality that's being realized progressively in the present, that is the church, and then of course the whole thing together in a perfect new heavens and a new earth is the ultimate picture of the Bible. Let's now put this big picture onto a timeline. Now, it's very important to think about the biblical worldview in narrative terms. It's a big story. It's important to understand not only what the story is, but where we are in that story. That is crucial for a biblical worldview, because the biblical worldview has a narrative structure to it. Now, of course, in the beginning, we have the perfect state represented by the Garden of Eden in Genesis chapter 2. And there is this sense in which, in this state, heaven and earth are kind of one and the same, perhaps even earth being a sort of physical facet of heaven or something like that. But there certainly is the sense in which heaven and earth are in this kind of perfect unity in some sense. What happens then with the fall is that you get, with the introduction of sin, a kind of separation between heaven and earth. This is a kind of relational separation. It's not spatial, it's not a dimensional separation or anything like that. It is a kind of relational separation, because now the earth becomes a realm in rebellion, as it were, and so there's this gulf with the earth as a place of rebellion. Heaven is depicted in many ways as separate, up in heaven, and you get this language of separation throughout the story of the Bible. And this is really history. This is where we sit here. Now we sit in the end part of this stage in history after the cross, and of course there is a sense in which Jesus has inaugurated the kingdom, and yet the kingdom is still coming and is still not yet. Now we're going to have a look at this in greater detail in a moment. But the culmination of Christ's work of redemption on the cross is really the reconciliation of all things. Heaven and earth are reunited. And that's what you get really at the end of the book of Revelation, in Revelation 21 and 22. You get this picture of a reunification of heaven and earth. And so there's a kind of return to the beginning state. In Genesis chapter 28, we have this famous story of Jacob's dream of the ladder. It says here, he had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending onto it. So the idea here is that there is, in a sense, this separation between heaven and earth, but God has a plan underway in which he is going to reconcile and do things in the world to bring about this plan of redemption. So that's a very important picture that anticipates this reconciliation of heaven and earth. And of course, this was ultimately achieved by Jesus on the cross, in which Jesus reconciles ultimately God with humanity, and therefore heaven and earth, these realms in some ways are reconciled. Not only that, but Jesus brings about the inauguration of the coming of the kingdom progressively in this age, and then culminately at the end of the age, and ultimately at the end of this age. The kingdom is coming. The kingdom is coming now. It began with Jesus' first coming. It is coming in this age and is going to come to full fruition in the age to come. And so you get this gradual reunification of the heavenly realm and the earthly realm, a heavenly realm understood as God's perfect realm with the earthly realm. And of course, Jesus taught us to pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So in that prayer, you get this sense of the breach between the two, but our prayers are mainly designed to see the reconciliation of the two, and that will ultimately be fulfilled in a new heavens and a new earth. Okay, so in the present then, we live in this already not yet period as it's been called. This is something that was highlighted by the New Testament theologian George Eldon Ladd, and has now become a very well-known and very useful way of understanding our present period, is that we live in the period of the already not yet. The kingdom is already coming. Jesus has already come, and yet Jesus is still to come to bring the coming of the kingdom to final fruition in the world. And so there is a sense of already the kingdom is breaking into the present. But there is also a sense of not yet. It's not yet come in its fullness. And so we live in this kind of tension between the two. And so it's not as though the age to come just follows this age, but in a sense, the age to come is already breaking in to the present period. And so this is this period between the two comings of Christ. The first and the second coming is the age of the already not yet, when the age to come, in a sense, we're already getting a taste of the age to come in this age. Well, it's from this that we get the idea of redemption history. In fact, it's from this that we get the idea of history as a linear trajectory. Of course, for history to be understood in a linear sense, presupposes the idea that it's going somewhere. Otherwise, what you have is essentially a cyclical view of history, which was the case before really the biblical worldview took root in culture, broadly speaking. So when we talk about history, when we talk about linear history from a theological point of view, certainly redemption history, we're talking about this space between the Garden of Eden after the fall right up to the new heavens and the new earth. This, of course, is where the biblical story fits, right from the fall to the flood, the patriarchs, the Exodus, right through to the stories of the kings, the divided kingdom, the exile, and of course Jesus' birth and the story of the church, which is even now unfolding right up to the new creation. But let's focus now on the present age that we're in right now. Going back to our timeline, we could zoom in and it could look something like this. So we have Christ's first coming, Christ's ascension, and we have this church period when by his Spirit God is gathering in the peoples. And then we have the second coming of Christ and the establishment of the new heavens and the new earth. Now, of course, you can insert, if you believe in a literal 1,000-year millennial kingdom, Revelation chapter 20, which may well be the case. You can insert that there accordingly. I don't want to get into the millennial debate right now. So this is the simplistic model, but this is kind of where we are right now. We're sitting in this church period here. So let's look at some things that the Bible says about this age and some broad scale things that we can expect of the age in which we're living. Well, first of all, there will be the spread and the fruition of the kingdom. Jesus made this very clear. For example, in Matthew chapter 13, it says, he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. He told them still another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour until it worked all through the dough. Now, clearly here, Jesus is predicting that the kingdom that begins like a very small seed in his time, he's saying this to his disciples, is going to grow. It's going to become this enormous worldwide thing that's going to have this impact, and many people are going to find shelter in the coming of the kingdom. So Jesus is in a sense predicting something amazing here. Pretty amazing prediction, and the second part of that parable, the parable of the yeast there, depicts the kingdom as spreading like yeast through dough. So it's going to spread throughout the world. Again, a remarkable prediction of Jesus. And of course, as we know, that has happened. The kingdom, certainly the church, the Christian movement has spread throughout the world and is still doing so. And as this happens, Jesus pictured a great polarization effect. And this is important because it helps us in our expectations of the future. People often ask the question, well, are things going to get better, or are things going to get worse? And the answer is both, depending on which perspective, but the answer is both together. This is the polarization effect. Whenever Jesus came into situations in his first coming, he had this polarization effect. He tended to bring out either the best or the worst in people, but often not much in between. And the imagery of polarization is like when a light shines really bright, the shadows become darker, and the brighter the light, the darker the shadows. That's the polarization effect. So we see this happening here. For example, again in Matthew chapter 13, Jesus told them another parable. It says, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in a field, but while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then also the weeds appeared. The owner's servant said to him and said, Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from? An enemy did this, he replied. The servants asked him, do you want us to go and pull them up? This is an important part of the parable, because Jesus doesn't want us in this age to be going around trying to uproot the weeds. So it says in verse 29, no, he answered, because while you are pulling up the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time, I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them into bundles to be burned, then gather the wheat into my barn. Then, of course, Jesus gives his explanation further on in verse 37. He interprets this parable. He says, the one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are his angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. He's talking the end of this age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. Now notice that. By the end of this age, the kingdoms of this world will become the kingdom of our God. So there's this sense in which the kingdoms of the world, which will be overthrown at the end of the age, according to the book of Revelation, there is this sense in which the kingdom will have spread all over the world. At that stage, that it can be referred to as the kingdom of God. Verse 42, they will throw them into the blazing furnace where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. So notice here the polarization effect. So as the age goes on, both the weeds and the wheat will come to fruition. So you get things, you get this great polarized situation. You certainly see that in the book of Revelation. In the book of Revelation, there are songs of triumph about the victory of the church, and yet, in a political sense, the church is being downtrodden, and all sorts of terrible things are happening in a political sense. So the kingdom of this world, in a sense, is doing its worst. It comes to a head at the end of the age, but so also does the church. It manifests itself in the most wonderful way in that as well. So in a sense, Jesus predicts the victory of the church, and that's made explicit in Matthew chapter 16. But what about you, he asked. Who do you say I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, Son of the living God. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound on heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. So notice here that he's going to build his church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. There's a sense in which the church will be victorious, not in a political sense, but in the sense of doing successfully bringing about this spread of the kingdom in the world, fulfilling the mission of Jesus. Well, let's remind ourselves now of the major events of the future with the coming of Christ. And here I'm just going to refer to these in broad terms. This is something that you'll cover when you study eschatology, general eschatology in theology class. At this stage, I'm just going to outline the major events and draw, again, some worldview implications from this. So first of all, there is the return of Christ. Christ will return to abolish all evil and to establish his kingdom. Then there is the physical resurrection of the dead, the resurrection of all of the dead, after which there will be the great day of judgment. And then after this, and of course, when depends on whether we hold to a literal millennial kingdom or not. You can discuss that in theology class, just taking the main events here. And then, of course, there is the new heavens and the new earth, the final, perfect, eternal state. Now, there is a question that arises here about the extent of the continuity between the world that we live in, the planet Earth that we live in now, and the new heavens and the new earth. So the question in relation to the main two texts of Revelation 21 and 2 Peter 3, is this present world going to be completely annihilated, or is this more of a purging or transformation? Revelation 21 says, then I saw a new heavens and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. 2 Peter chapter 3 says, the heavens will disappear with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything in it will be laid bare. That day will bring about the destruction of the heavens by fire, and the elements will melt in the heat. But in keeping with his promise, we are looking forward to a new heavens and a new earth, the home of the righteous. Now, there's certainly, the language there is drastic, and the emphasis here is on discontinuity. But discontinuity of system very much. This isn't really addressing the continuity of the physical, the physical planet itself. It's simply saying that there's going to be a complete renewal. And the old is going to be destroyed, and something completely new is going to be brought about, particularly with respect to the world system, which is the main concern actually of Scripture. It's the world system as such. But you remember that the world originally, the way that God created it, was created good, and so a lot of that goodness still resides within creation. Of course, it's being terribly undermined by human beings, or has been, over the last thousands of years, however many thousands of years. But this will be completely renewed. I think it's best to take this more in terms of transformation than annihilation. Now, the annihilationist view is a little bit too Platonic, the idea that the sort of end of the space-time universe. No, I think the emphasis here in these verses in context is that of transformation rather than annihilation. And so what is described here in 2 Peter is a complete purging of the earth in the standard sort of dramatic prophetic language. So it's important again that we distinguish this from the Platonic worldview, which sees the end of the space-time universe as ultimately desirable, but this is not the biblical view. The end of this age is not the end of the world. It's not the end of the space-time universe. It's a complete transformation and the ushering in of a new heavens and a new earth in that sense. The Bible teaches us that we will spend eternity with physical bodies on a renewed earth. This, of course, is our home. This perspective is important because it affirms what is affirmed in Genesis 1 and 2, and that is God's commitment to this beautiful creation and God's recognition of the goodness of what he had created. That wasn't a mistake to be washed away. No, God is renewing all things so that they might be as they were in the beginning, perhaps in some sense even better. What was in the beginning, of course, was perfectly good, but there was still work for humankind to do in the world to fill the earth and subdue it. The picture in Revelation chapters 21 and 22 feels more developed than that. Of course, there's a lot of mystery here, but the important thing to recognize is that the Bible pictures us in glorified physical bodies, of course, different in nature. Paul addresses this in 1 Corinthians 15, but still very much physical, living on a physical earth. Okay, let's now draw out some of the implications of all of this for a biblical worldview. All of this together means that this life in this world is a limited and transitory stage before an eternal and permanent state. This life in this world, then, is preparation for the next life in the next world. Throughout the New Testament, the emphasis is always on what is coming about in the future. It's very future-oriented, the New Testament. And this age is understood in this very temporary sense. We're taught that we should live in a transitory state as aliens and strangers in the world, as Peter says in his letter. Our task is to build a redemptive missional community. It is not to try to build a permanent utopia. And of course, that redemptive missional community is the church. As Jesus said, I will build my church. And the church is a kind of a foretaste of the perfect community of the new heavens and the new earth, but it's also the means through which God brings about the establishment of his kingdom on earth, now progressively. Secondly, this life in this world is imperfect, incomplete, and unresolved. In this life, in the world, the way that it is, we will therefore never fully reach God's ideals. That awaits a resurrected, glorified body in the future. We will progressively grow in faith, we will grow in character, but that will never be complete until the future. There will always be a sense in which we fall short, and of course, as we know, God's grace covers that. But John can say in his first letter that if we say that we are without sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not us, because there's always a sense of incompleteness. We're growing, we're getting better, we're growing in character and so forth, but we're never fully going to be there. And our perfection is something that lies in the future age, in a resurrected body, in new heavens and a new earth. We will never, therefore, be completely whole. We will never reach complete fulfillment and we will never be, therefore, completely happy, not in this broken body, in this broken world right now. We can have peace, we can have joy, and there is a sense in which that peace and that joy is perfect in the sense that it comes from God, but we will always have it not in a sort of incomplete sense, not in its fullest sense. This means then, and this is really important to underscore, particularly in our culture. Our culture says that the purpose of life is to fulfill all our dreams and desires and get everything that we want, be whoever we want to be, and so forth. But according to the Bible, the purpose of life is actually not to fulfill our dreams and desires. This life actually, if anything, is characterized by unfulfillment. Because remember, we live in the tension of the already not yet. Let's recognize the already, but let's also recognize the not yet. The final fulfillment awaits in the future. And as I said, the Bible is very much future oriented. So there's a very important sense in which the Christian life is an unfulfilled life. I know that sounds funny because we think, oh, I'm fulfilled in God and so forth. And yes, in an ordinary sense, we can say that. But there's a very important sense in which the Christian life is meant to be actually a life of unfulfillment, a life of longing for what is future. And of course, God is fulfilling his promises now. He is fulfilling his promises. But the point is the ultimate fulfillment still lies in the future. Now, the implication of this is that you may not have the relationship you want. You may not be able to have children. You may not see the fruits of your labor. You may not receive due recognition. You will not reach your full potential, not in this life. You will not receive final justice. No, that comes when Jesus returns. You will not therefore be fully happy. You will not be fully healed, because even if you get dramatically healed in this life, and may that indeed happen, and certainly it does happen, yet your body is still dying and you're still going to die. The resurrected body, the immortal body, is something you receive in the future, and therefore you will not be fully restored, not in this life. Again, that lies in the future. So you will often be hurt, bereaved, unloved, rejected, betrayed. You will always be imperfect. You will always be incomplete. You will always be unfulfilled in a sense. You will always, therefore, be discontent. And you're meant to be discontent. God doesn't want you to like things the way that they are. Love not the world, John says. It's important. There's a godly discontentment. Certainly there is a godly contentment, but that contentment is in God and in what we have in God. But there is this important sense of godly discontentment in the way that we are and the way that the world is. The purpose of life, of this life, is Christ's mission. This is what life is all about. Now, this will often mean sacrificing your personal dreams and desires, or even your very life. A way of illustrating this is that we are in some sense like troops on a mission who are dropped out of a helicopter on one hill with a very specific mission to fulfill, to be picked up on another hill a week later, so to speak. And it's so important that within this intermediate period between being dropped off and picked up, and this is our life, we are to stick with the mission. It's not about getting comfortable. It's not about being at home in that territory. It's about specifically fulfilling a mission. And it's, don't get too ensconced. Don't get lost. Don't go off track, because you'll miss the pickup on the other. And that kind of is the sense of urgency and focus that pervades the teaching of the New Testament about this life now that we are living. The three guiding virtues in this life are faith, hope, and love. And I want to say something about hope particularly now. Notice in Romans 5 the emphasis on hope. Of course, you have both faith and love here as well. But I want to underscore the importance of hope and actually what hope is. I think it's often the faith and the love are highlighted more than the hope bit. It says here in Romans chapter 5, therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into his grace, in which we now stand. And we boast in the hope of the glory of God. Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. So notice here what it's saying. It says, and we boast in the hope of the glory of God. In some sense, our hope is the foundation of our joy. And notice here how hope actually is formed. Hope is formed through the travail of living this life, being on mission in this life, because of course suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. Whereas faith is the assurance of the things that God is bringing about. Hope is the longing for that. Hope is the longing for the things that God is bringing about in the future. Romans chapter 8 says, we know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to our present time. This part of chapter 8 is a crucial worldview bit of teaching here. The whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, Paul says, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. Notice the emphasis there on future redemption. And notice here how he says that a key fruit of the Spirit, he says we have the first fruits of the Spirit. And because of that, you might expect him to say, we're just happy all the time. Well, there is a sense of joy in that, but the joy actually comes from our hope. The joy is coming from seeing the faithfulness of God realized in this age. It comes from our relationship with God, and very much from the assurance that we have of what God is bringing about. It's very much in our future inheritance. And the fruit of the Spirit here, interestingly, is this groaning inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship. So notice the future orientation. Notice the fact that this world here is depicted as Paul, for those who are filled with the Spirit, are being one as groaning inwardly, the longing, the certain anticipation, but the almost painful anticipation of what is coming about in the future. Verse 24, notice what it says here, for in this hope we were saved. Through this hope of longing for what is future, we don't get lost now. We don't get drawn down into the things of this world, because there's this godly discontentment that we have. We don't like the world the way that it is. We don't want to be, we live in the world, but we don't want to be of it. And so there's this longing, this hope in the future has this saving effect. And he goes on to say, but hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. Well then, thirdly, final fulfillment, final healing and ultimate perfection is only found in the new heavens and the new earth. In other words, there can and there simply will not be a political utopia in this age. This is really important lest we find ourselves fighting for the wrong cause. Political utopias are something that exists in many ideologies. In a sense, the optimism of progress as associated with the belief in progress is a belief in a kind of technological utopia in the future. But in the last module, we talked about this in terms of the the multi-story building that keeps adding stories, but the foundations are bad. And so almost the further the building goes, the more you go on, the more dangerous the whole thing becomes, because the foundations essentially are bad. World history is built on the foundations of an autonomous and independent humanity to a large extent. And so the world system as such is doomed, as we see in the book of Revelation. But again, we're not meant to love this world. Do not love the world. And he's talking about the world system, says John in his first letter. And so it's important that in this age, we recognize what life is all about. It's about the mission of Jesus. And it's very important that we stay focused on that. And that then concludes Module 12 of Christian Worldview.